The knock came while the lawyer's letter still lay open on my kitchen table, heavy as a stone. To my sister Eleanor, I leave everything. My brother's handwriting, steady, final, blurred as my eyes filled. Before I could reach for a tissue, another sound, a cough on my porch, a shape behind the frosted glass. I wiped my cheeks, smoothed my sweater, and opened the door. There he was, my son, older, grayer, the same eyes I'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. 30 years of silence collapsed between us like a bridge on fire. He swallowed hard and said the word that used to mean home. Mom. I always thought grief had a color, but it turns out it has a weight. It's the weight of a thick, cream envelope with my name written in my brother's careful hand. It's the weight of a pen I can't hold steady. It's the weight of words that change the room you're sitting in, even the air you breathe. To my sister Eleanor, I leave everything. I read it twice. I read it 3 times. Across my small, clean kitchen, yellow light on the laminate countertop, the lemon oil smell from the wooden table. Everything looked the same but wasn't. My brother, Daniel, had been gone 2 weeks. He'd been the kind of man who polished his shoes every Sunday and knew the birthdays of his neighbors' children. We grew up in a house where scarcity taught you to fix things and kindness taught you to keep them fixed. When our parents died, it was Daniel who stood at the sink with me, sleeves rolled, washing the dishes after the funeral like normalcy could be put back together with soap and hot water. Now his life was reduced to letters and meetings, and a will the attorney read as gently as she could. He didn't have children. He had stocks and buildings and a stack of notebooks with numbers in neat columns. He had a picture of us from 1968, my hair in a ribbon, his hand on my shoulder, and he had this decision: leave everything to me. I don't use the word everything lightly. I've lived most of my 74 years on the narrow side of enough. I know the price of a loaf of bread in 5 different decades. I've stretched soup and made dresses from curtains and smiled through worry. I am not ashamed of that. I am proud. But I was not prepared for everything to arrive in a single sentence. The kettle whistled. I turned the flame low, poured the water over a tea bag, and watched the first swirl of color rise. When you're overwhelmed, small rituals hold you to the world. Stirring, breathing, folding a dish towel so the edges line up. On the wall near the fridge hangs a corkboard. It holds grocery lists, doctor's appointment cards, and one photograph I never took down. Daniel and me on the pier, both with sunburned noses, holding paper cones of ice cream. And tucked behind that photo, yellowed and brittle with time, is an index card with a sentence written in red pen. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe as proof that it happened. Maybe to remind myself I survived it. You're dead to me. It wasn't a letter. It was a message scrawled in rage, shoved into my mailbox one September afternoon, 30 years ago. The handwriting was slanted, firm, familiar. It was my son's. I can still taste the metallic sting of those words. I can still feel the way my knees went weak so fast I had to sit on the curb. People tell you time dulls pain. That's true for some things. Not for words like those. They live in the marrow. I pushed my tea toward the edge of the table and took slow, careful sips. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that magnifies faraway noises. The creak of the maple tree, a passing truck, the low hum of the refrigerator. And then a sound that was not far away at all. A knock at the front door. Firm. 2 beats. Then a pause. Then another knock, softer, almost a question. My hand found the back of the dining chair. I stood, set the mug down, and walked the short hall. The frosted glass of the door blurred the figure into a dark shape. Not the mailman. Not Ruth from next door. She always rings and calls my name at the same time like a cheerful alarm. I opened the door. It is strange how a face you've traced from memory can still feel like a surprise. He had my father's brow now, and the beginnings of my grandfather's jowls. The boy who used to let dandelions go to seed just to make a wish stood there with a man's slump to his shoulders, the city on his coat in the form of grit. He smelled like cold air and the faintest hint of cigarette smoke. His grey hair was cut close, as if discipline could box out history. "Mom," he said. The word hung there between us. I realized my hands were shaking, part shock, part the old anger waking up and stretching its limbs. My mouth went dry. "Mark," I managed. "It's been a long time." He swallowed, eyes skittering past me into the house, as if looking for witnesses or riches or ghosts. "May I come in?" For a heartbeat, I saw it all over again in a tumble. The down payment I gave him and his wife for their first condo, the weekend I babysat so they could regain their spark, and the way the dishes piled up until I did them. The car I co-signed for so he could take that job 2 towns over. The emergency cash in an envelope when their investment went sour. The birthday dinners where I sat alone with a store-bought cake. My phone silent. And then that September afternoon when I knocked on their door because the bank had called me about a payment I didn't know existed. The woman who opened it, my daughter-in-law, Tonya, smiled with her mouth and not her eyes. "Mark isn't here," she said. "And you shouldn't be either." "I got a call from the bank," I told her. "They said my name is on a loan." "I never. That's how we structured it," she said, as if we were business partners. "It's better for taxes." "You signed." I remember looking at the place where my name would have been. "I didn't sign that." "Maybe you forgot," she said, her voice honey over glass. "You're getting older." When Mark finally appeared, he didn't take my hand, didn't invite me in. He stood half behind the door, like a teenager caught with stolen cigarettes. "You forged my name," I said, and my voice shook. "You put me on a loan for a business I've never even seen." He rubbed the back of his neck, looked at the floor. "You said you'd help." "Help is not stealing," I said. "Help is not signing my name when I am not there." And then his face, my baby's face, hardened into an expression I didn't know. He looked up as if to find a line he'd rehearsed and finally found it. "You're dead to me," he said. "I'm done with your guilt." The door closed with a sound I still hear in my sleep. Now, 30 years later, he stood on my porch and asked to come in. The lawyer's letter was still on my table. My brother's life, concentrated into assets and bequests, was suddenly mine to protect. I thought of Tonya's smile like a blade. I thought of signatures and shadows. I thought of my own heart, which had worked so hard to heal. "Not yet," I said and stepped outside, pulling the door almost closed behind me. "What do you need, Mark?" He seemed surprised, maybe at the boundary, maybe at the way my voice didn't tremble this time. He took a breath that turned to fog in the cold March air. "I heard about Uncle Daniel," he said. He glanced at the window, at the neat curtains I made last winter, at the quiet house that held my careful life. I wanted to say I'm sorry. And I wanted to talk. "How did you hear?" I asked. "People talk," he said, and tried a smile that didn't land anywhere. "Small town." I knew better. Daniel had friends in the city, in courts and clubs where news travels faster than the mail. The will would be public soon enough, but rumors have their own timetable. "Walk with me," I said, and pointed to the edge of the porch where the old swing hung. We sat, the chain creaking softly, the way it had when he was 15 and slumped here after his first heartbreak. Back then I'd said, "Your heart is not a waste. It's a garden. Things can grow again." He'd laughed and told me I was corny. I had worn that as a badge. He cleared his throat. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know what I said. I was angry. I was stupid." "You were cruel," I said, not unkindly, and watched him flinch. "And you were not alone in that cruelty. Tonya, she was." He stopped, picked the skin by his thumbnail. "We're not together anymore." I felt nothing at that. Not the relief I might have felt once. Not triumph. Just a quiet click, like a piece of a puzzle finding its inevitable place. I am sorry for Uncle Daniel, he continued. I should have visited him more. He was good to me when Dad. He cut himself off and looked at me. The old wedge between us was crowded with many names. My late husband's drinking, the year we lost the house and then got it back room by room, the fights that taught Mark to shut doors rather than open them. Every family has its map of fault lines. Ours is long. I know why you came, I said. Say it plain. He looked at his hands, big and competent, the hands of a man who could fix a sink and break a trust. When he finally met my eyes, I saw the boy again for a split second, the one who used to run home from school with pebbles in his pockets to show me the ones that looked like hearts. I'm in trouble, he said. The kind of trouble money could solve. There it was. Clean and sharp as a bell. I see, I said. I thought maybe we could start over, he added quickly. I thought maybe, after everything, we could try again. I'm different now. People think age makes you softer. Sometimes it makes you exact. The last 30 years had been hard in places, but they had given me something I didn't have before. Not just the courage to love, but the courage to protect that love with fences and locks and, if needed, lawyers. I'm different now too, I said. And starting over does not mean forgetting. He nodded, swallowed. Could we at least talk? We are, I said. And before we go any further, hear me. I will not make decisions on my porch, in the cold, because you arrived with a story and a need. I will think. I will pray. And I will get advice. He looked surprised again, as if he had expected the mother who fixed everything with a hug and a casserole. He had forgotten that grief can forge a spine. That morning, before the knock, I had already made a call to Ruth, my next-door neighbor and oldest friend. Ruth is a retired nurse with sensible shoes and a brain like a file cabinet. When my husband died, it was Ruth who sat with me on the floor and sorted the paperwork into stacks labeled, now, soon, and later. When Daniel got sick, it was Ruth who wrote the medication schedule in marker big enough for him to read without his glasses. Ruth had answered on the second ring. I'll come by after lunch, she said when I told her about the will. We'll make a list. You'll need a lawyer who cares more about people than clocks. I think Daniel already chose one, I said, and read her the attorney's name from the letter. Ms. Klein. Ruth said, a sound like a nod through the phone. We'll see if she's good enough for you. Ruth would also remember things I forgot and point out things I didn't see, including, if needed, faces at my door. Give me a day, I told Mark now. Come back tomorrow at noon. We'll talk here on the porch. Bring whatever you think I need to see. And know this, I will not sign anything today or tomorrow or any day without my attorney present. He blinked. Attorney. My brother's attorney for his estate. And mine. He sat back, the chains creaking. The wind picked up and rattled the dry leaves in the gutter. He nodded again, slower this time. Okay, he said. Tomorrow. He stood, stuffed his hands in his pockets, then pulled them out again like he wasn't sure what to do with them. For a second, he seemed to want to hug me. He didn't. He walked down the steps, paused at the gate, and looked back. Thank you for opening the door, he said. I didn't, I said, and let a small smile soften it. I opened the porch. When he was gone, I went back inside and locked the door. Not out of fear, but out of habit born from wisdom. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the quiet resettle like dust after a shelf has been moved. I called Ruth and told her everything. She made a sound I have heard from her only twice before, once when my husband relapsed, once when the doctor called a shadow on Daniel's scan. It is a sound like a kettle that won't boil, readiness held in check. Good, she said when I told her I'd set a boundary. Now, write down everything you remember about that loan 30 years ago. Dates, names, scraps. We're not digging through the past to reopen a wound. We're digging so nothing poisonous grows there again. I took out a notebook, the kind Daniel liked, with soft paper, and began to write. The pen felt steadier now. I wrote the year and the month. I wrote the bank's name. I wrote Tonya's words, the ones that smelled like honey and shards. I wrote the way my stomach had dropped when I saw the forged signature. I wrote, "You're dead to me" in block letters, then, next to it, wrote, "I am not." When Ms. Klein called back that evening, her voice was warm and direct. "Your brother and I planned for this," she said. "He wanted you protected from pressure. The estate is in a trust with clear clauses. No one can force your hand without your say. Tomorrow, please come in. Bring any notes. We'll go over your options, and if you want, I'll arrange for a private investigator to review anything that concerns you about past documents. It's not paranoia. It's prudence." Prudence. A beautiful, old-fashioned word. It felt like a shawl around my shoulders. After I hung up, I walked through my house and touched the things that kept me steady. The flower jar with a chip on the rim, the quilt I finished last winter, the faded rug where Daniel used to sit cross-legged when he visited, telling me about the market like it was a puzzle he enjoyed. My life is not fancy, but it is mine. That everything in the letter? The money, the buildings, the accounts, those are new. The real everything is this. My breath. My boundaries. My hard-won peace. Night settled. I made a simple dinner, eggs, toast, tomatoes warmed in butter. When I washed the pan, the rhythmic scrape of the sponge felt like a hymn. I dried my hands, checked the front lock one more time, and stood at the corkboard again. I slid the old index card fully out. I looked at the sentence, at the way the ink had bled into the paper, turning sharp edges soft. "You're dead to me." I thought about setting a match to it. Instead, I slid it back in place and pinned Daniel's photo on top again. Not to hide it. To put it in context. Above those angry words was a brother's smile, squinting into the sun, saying without speaking, "You kept going. You keep going." Tomorrow, my son would return at noon. Tomorrow, I would have Ruth on the other side of the hedge, pruning her roses coincidentally. Tomorrow, I would sit with Ms. Klein and learn how to put the trust between me and anyone who wanted to push me. Tomorrow, I might hear an apology. I might not. But tonight, I would sleep in a house that knew my steps, with a spine strengthened by love and loss, with a pen ready on the table, and with the door locked. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who hurt you is to give them the mercy of a boundary. I turned off the kitchen light, and in the dark window, my reflection looked back at me, an old woman with steady shoulders. Not fragile, not foolish. A woman who could hold sorrow and still make tea. A woman who could receive a fortune and still know who she is. A woman who would not be hurried or handled. A woman preparing, not for a fight, but for the truth. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the quiet house. "We do this the right way." The next morning dawned gray, the kind of sky that holds its breath as if rain or sun could win the argument. I woke before the alarm, my bones remembering the promise I had made. Noon. My son would be back. I moved through my morning slowly, not from weakness but from intention. I boiled oatmeal, stirred in cinnamon, and sliced an apple into neat wedges. The smell of cinnamon always brings Daniel to me. He loved it on everything, even his coffee. I let the scent fill the kitchen, a small act of memory and comfort. By 10 o'clock, Ruth knocked and let herself in with the familiarity of 50 years of friendship. She wore her gardening hat, wide-brimmed and practical, and carried a pair of pruning shears in one hand. "I'll be in the yard, right by the hedge," she said. "If you so much as clear your throat funny, I'll know." I laughed, grateful. "You always did have good ears." Her face softened. And you've always had a tender heart, Eleanor. Don't mistake that for weakness today. When she left, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. I reviewed what I'd written. The dates, the forged loan, the cruel words. I underlined the note from Ms. Klein. The trust protects you. No one can claim what you don't freely give. Those words were a shield I repeated like prayer. At 11:30, I put on my good sweater, the navy one Daniel had bought me 2 Christmases ago. It had pearl buttons that gleamed soft in the light. Dressing with care was not vanity. It was armor. I made tea and set 2 cups on the counter. I wasn't sure if I'd pour the second one, but the gesture gave me strength. I was host, not victim. This was my porch, my ground. At exactly noon, his shadow fell across the frosted glass. He knocked once, twice. I opened the door but did not step aside. Porch only, I said. He nodded and came up the steps, his eyes flicking to the hedge where Ruth knelt with her roses. He noticed, of course. Good. We sat. The swing creaked. For a while, the only sound was Ruth's shears snipping rhythmically. Mark cleared his throat. Thank you for seeing me again. I folded my hands. You said you were in trouble. Explain. He hesitated, then spoke. It's debt. I invested in a project. Real estate. It collapsed. I thought I could handle it, but the numbers got away from me. I owe people, Mom. People who won't wait forever. I listened. His voice was smoother now, practiced. I thought of the boy who once tried to convince me his broken window had been already cracked. He had always been quick with words. And you came here, I said slowly, the day you heard about Daniel's will. His cheeks flushed. I didn't come for money. I came for you. I tilted my head. For me. Yes, he said quickly. I know what I did 30 years ago. I know the words I said. I've carried them every day since. Tonya, she pushed me, but I let her. I chose pride over family. I was wrong. The porch was silent, but for the wind nudging the chains of the swing. I studied him. There was shame in his eyes, yes, but also calculation. Regret and need often wear the same clothes. I accept your apology, I said, watching his shoulders drop in relief. Then I added, firm. But acceptance does not mean forgetting. It does not mean trust. He flinched. Mom, I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me try again. Please. I thought of Daniel's neat handwriting. To my sister, Eleanor, I leave everything. My brother had trusted me with his life's work because he knew I would not squander it, not even for love misplaced. Trying again takes time, I said. And trust is built in actions, not pleas. If you want to be part of my life, you will earn it slowly, with honesty. But if you came here hoping to dip into Daniel's estate, know this, it is protected. And I will protect it. His jaw tightened, the mask slipping just for a second. So that's it. You'd rather trust strangers than your own son? I leaned forward, voice steady. My son made me a stranger 30 years ago. Strangers can become family. Family can become strangers. That's life. But today, I choose to trust myself. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, hands shoved deep in his pockets. I guess I deserved that, he muttered. You deserved the truth, I replied. At the hedge, Ruth's shears clipped once, twice, like punctuation. Mark hesitated at the steps. He looked back at me, searching, but I did not fill the silence for him. He left with his shoulders heavy, the gate clicking shut behind him. I sat on the swing a long while after, my tea gone cold. My heart ached, yes, but not like it once did. This ache was cleaner, the kind that heals rather than festers. For the first time in 30 years, I felt the weight of that old index card lift, just slightly. The morning after Mark's visit, I found myself smoothing the edges of Daniel's letter again. My brother's will had become more than words on a page. It was my armor. Still, I knew armor is only useful if you learn how to wear it. That's why I kept my appointment with Ms. Klein. Her office was on Main Street, in one of those old brick buildings with creaky stairs and tall windows that let in generous light. I liked that the waiting room smelled of coffee and lemon polish rather than power or money. The receptionist smiled warmly, not the brittle way some people do when they're measuring your worth by your shoes. "Mrs. Carter," she said. "Ms. Klein will see you now." I carried my notebook in both hands, as if it were a talisman. Inside were all my scribbles, the dates, the memory of that forged loan, the words my son had thrown at me. When I stepped into the lawyer's office, I smelled lavender. A small vase of fresh flowers sat on the desk. Ms. Klein stood, a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her dark hair. She wore a navy suit but no jewelry, and her eyes had the kind of patience that puts you at ease. She shook my hand firmly. "Eleanor, your brother spoke of you often. Please, sit." I lowered myself into the chair, the leather cool against my palms. She folded her hands. "Your brother left his estate in a trust designed to protect you. That means no one, not family, not creditors, can touch it without your consent. It is yours to manage, but with safeguards. Did you have questions?" I opened my notebook and pushed it toward her. Not so much questions as history. My son and his wife forged my name on documents 30 years ago. They tied me to a loan without consent. He's reappeared now, right after my brother's passing. I want to know what he can and cannot do. She read through my notes carefully, nodding occasionally. When she looked up, her expression was calm but serious. "Legally, Mark has no claim. Emotionally, however." She let the sentence hang. "Emotionally," I said, "he knows exactly where to press. He knows the shape of the wound he left." Ms. Klein leaned forward. "Eleanor, what happened to you all those years ago wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud. If you still have any of the documents, we can look into them. Even after 30 years, a record exists. Sometimes the act of bringing truth to light is what frees us, not necessarily the punishment of the guilty." I felt my throat tighten. "I kept one thing," I whispered. "The note he left. You're dead to me." Her eyes softened. Words can wound deeper than contracts, but they can also remind you how far you've come. We spent the next hour reviewing the trust. She explained in simple terms. I would receive income from my brother's properties, dividends from his investments, and the right to decide what to do with the principal. Safeguards meant no rash decisions, no one sneaking papers under my nose. "Daniel wanted peace for you," she said. "He wanted to give you power without the burden." For the first time in days, my shoulders eased. Power without burden. That was something I had never known. As I left her office, I saw my reflection in the glass door. An older woman, yes. Wrinkles around my eyes, silver in my hair. But also a woman standing taller, notebook clutched like a shield, heart steady. Outside, Ruth was waiting in her car, a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. She rolled down the window. Well, I said, sliding into the passenger seat. "Daniel thought of everything. And I have someone smart in my corner now." She grinned. "Good. Because you'll need both brains and backbone for what's coming." That evening, as I sat in my living room, the quiet wrapped around me like a quilt. My fingers traced the arm of the chair where my grandchildren used to climb when they were small. Yes, I am a grandmother, though distance has often kept me from that role. My son's choices built a wall not only between him and me, but between me and the children who should have known my stories, my cookies, my lullabies. The ache of that loss pressed on me harder than money ever could. Wealth could never buy back the bedtime tales or the school recitals I missed. Yet here I was with a second chance, not with Mark perhaps, but with myself. As if on cue, the phone rang. I lifted it, already knowing. His voice was hesitant. "Mom, it's me." "I know," I said evenly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For yesterday. For not slamming the door in my face." My hand tightened around the receiver. I didn't slam it. But I didn't open it, either. He sighed. "Fair enough. Can we meet again? Just talk." I thought of Ms. Klein's advice, of Ruth's steady presence, of Daniel's trust. Slowly, I answered, "We can talk. But not alone. And not without boundaries." A pause. Then, "All right. Whatever you need." When I hung up, I felt the oddest mix of sorrow and strength. He was reaching, yes, but was it for me, or for what I now held? I didn't know yet. But this time, I wouldn't step blindly. I turned off the lamp, the room sinking into soft shadows. In the window, my reflection met my gaze again. This time, the woman looking back was not trembling. She was preparing. Saturday arrived with a nervous kind of brightness. I baked a small batch of muffins that morning, not because I expected gratitude, but because the act of stirring and measuring steadied me. At noon, Mark came again. This time, I had Ruth waiting in the kitchen, her presence like a quiet anchor, and Ms. Klein on standby by phone. When I opened the door, I let him in only as far as the living room. The house smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish, homely and safe. He looked around with something between longing and calculation. "Mom," he began, "thank you for seeing me again." I gestured to the chair opposite mine. "Sit. Talk." He lowered himself, his hands restless. "I won't lie, I'm drowning. The debts are crushing. But I also want to fix what I broke with you. I miss my children having their grandmother. I miss family." The words pricked at me. Grandmother. I thought of the years I wasn't invited, the birthdays I only heard about from neighbors. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Mark," I said softly, "you miss what you put away. You built a wall, and I lived on the other side of it." His eyes filled, but there was desperation behind the tears. "Please, Mom. Just a little help. A loan. I swear I'll pay it back." I sat taller, the way Daniel used to in a courtroom. No loans. No signatures. No repeats of the past. If you want a relationship, you'll earn it with honesty, not contracts. The silence stretched. He nodded slowly, like a man realizing the ground had shifted. And for the first time, I felt something new. Not fear of losing him, but strength in standing firm. 2 days later, Ms. Klein invited me to her office again. Ruth insisted on coming along, her steady hand looped through my arm as we walked up those creaky stairs. On the desk sat a thin folder with my name. "I asked a contact at the bank to dig through old records," Ms. Klein said. "It took time, but we found it." She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a copy of the loan document from 30 years ago. There it was, my name in handwriting that was almost mine, but not. The R in Carter curled wrong, the E too sharp. My stomach clenched. Proof. After all these years, proof. Ruth's hand closed over mine. "You weren't crazy," she whispered. "They stole from you." Ms. Klein leaned forward. "This kind of forgery would have been grounds for criminal charges. Had you pursued it then? Even now, it shows a pattern of behavior, one that can protect you from any future manipulation." I thought of Mark's tearful eyes, his plea for help. And I saw it clearly. The desperation wasn't only for reconciliation. It was for money. The pattern hadn't changed, only the stakes. That evening, when Mark called again, I didn't tremble. "I've seen the documents," I told him calmly. "The forgery, the betrayal. I will not repeat history." He was silent for a long moment. Then he muttered, "So you'd let your own son sink?" I closed my eyes, hearing Daniel's voice in memory. "Eleanor, peace is worth protecting." "No," I said firmly. "I'm letting him swim or sink by his own strength. Mine is no longer for borrowing." And when I hung up, the weight of 30 years began to lift from my chest. When Mark came by the next afternoon, I didn't meet him on the porch. I invited him into the dining room, where the polished table reflected the light of the lamp above. Ruth sat at the end, silent but watchful, and Miss Klein joined us through speakerphone. Mark's eyes darted between them. "Do we really need an audience for this?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Because the last time I trusted you behind closed doors, I ended up carrying debts I never signed for." His face hardened. "You're dredging up old mistakes." I said I was sorry. I pushed the folder across the table. "Sorry doesn't erase proof. This is your handwriting, Mark. You and Tonya forged my name. You took my trust and turned it into a tool." He paled, lips tightening. "I was desperate back then. You don't know what it was like." "I do know," I cut in. "I was the one who paid the calls from the bank. I was the one who carried shame I never earned." My voice trembled, but not with fear, with truth. Ruth nodded approvingly. Ms. Klein's voice came through the speaker, calm and steady. "Eleanor's estate is secure. You cannot touch it without her willful consent. This meeting is to make that clear." Mark sat back, defeated. The man who once declared me dead to him now stared at the floor like a child caught lying. I leaned forward, softening my voice. "Mark, I will always be your mother. But I am not your lifeline. If you want a relationship, it must be honest, without money in the middle. That is the only door I'll open." For the first time, he had no quick answer. Only silence. That night, after Mark left, I sat in my living room with the old quilt across my knees. The house was still, the kind of quiet that used to make me feel lonely. But not tonight. Tonight it felt like protection. For years, I had prayed for reconciliation, begged heaven for the sound of my son's voice at my door. And now that he had returned, I realized something I never expected. I didn't need him to make me whole. I thought of Daniel, his careful shoes, his neat handwriting, the way he always said, "Protect your peace, Ellie. That's the only true fortune." He hadn't just left me money. He had left me the chance to live without fear, without being cornered. I pinned that old index card back on my corkboard, "You're dead to me," and this time I laughed softly. Those words had once broken me, but now they had no power. Above them hung Daniel's photo, smiling in the sun, and beside it a note I wrote in my own hand. "I am alive. I am enough." When Ruth checked on me later, I told her, "I'm done begging to be chosen. My son will either walk honestly beside me or not at all. Either way, I stand." She squeezed my hand, proud. "I am a grandmother, yes. A sister, a mother, a widow. But more than all that, I am a woman who has learned that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers, 'No more.' So I will move forward, holding my brother's gift, guarding my peace, and living the rest of my days not in fear of betrayal, but in the freedom of self-respect. And that, I realized, is the truest inheritance of all." Weeks passed, and the season began to soften. The first buds appeared on Ruth's rose bushes, delicate but determined, reminding me that life always insists on renewal. Mark came once more, standing hesitant at the porch. This time he didn't ask for money. He asked if I'd like to meet his children for lunch. My heart tugged, but I kept my ground. "If it's an honest visit, yes. but leave debts and requests at the door." He nodded, and for the first time, I believed he might mean it. Still, I understood something vital. Whether he changed or not was no longer my burden to carry. My worth was not tied to his choices. For 30 years I'd lived under the shadow of abandonment, and now I had stepped out into my own sunlight. I began small things I'd once postponed. I joined the library's book circle. I planted herbs in clay pots along the window ledge. I wrote letters to my grandchildren, telling them stories about their family. Not the bitter ones, but the ones full of love and grit, so they would know where they came from. And each night, I touched Daniel's photo and whispered, "Thank you, brother. You gave me more than wealth. You gave me freedom." In the end, the fortune wasn't the buildings or the accounts. It was the strength to say no. It was the wisdom to hold my boundaries. It was the quiet joy of choosing peace. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had also endured. And in that endurance, I found a power no one could steal again. That is my story. That is my inheritance. And at last, it is enough.